In today's video tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate a really cute flamingo themed cake, which would be perfect for Valentine's Day or anniversaries. Okay, so we are starting off by creating our flamingos, and I'm going to be using an extruder to extrude a strand of fondant. For our pink fondant, we needed in a little bit of Tylose powder. And I'm just going to speed up the video so that you can see. I'm just going to use the little crank to get some length, and then next I'm going to measure off or mark off 2 strands that are the same length. And I used about maybe a little over 4 inches for each flamingo for the neck and head. And that's completely up to you. You might decide that you want your flamingos to be a little bit shorter or taller. So just go with what makes sense for you. And here I added just a little bit of vegetable shortening because my fondant I could feel was drying out just a little bit. But to make the beak, you just pinch the end, and then you're going to slightly flatten the head or slightly flatten the end to create the head of the flamingo and just make it a little bit fatter. Looking back, I probably could have curved the beaks a little bit more, but this is just how I did it. So if you wanted to give the beak just a little more curve, you would just pinch it a little bit longer, or pinch to make the beaks a little bit longer and curve them. Okay, so the main idea for the cake is that their necks and heads will form a heart shape. So you can see I've lined that up. And as an optional step, I decided to flatten a ball of pink fondant for each flamingo to create the body. And I say that's optional because we're going to wind up covering the bodies with buttercream feathers anyway. But I still kind of like to use the little pink fondant bodies as a guide so that I know that they're the same size once I add my piping. And then once the fondant has set to the touch, you can go ahead and add the eyes and color in the beak with a food coloring pen. And just as another little detail, I decided to mix a little bit of white coloring gel with just a touch of vodka. And I'm applying a little marking using a toothpick just above the beak. So this is optional, but I do think it's a cute little detail to add. The cake that I'm working with today is a double barrel cake. It's a 6-inch cake. I frosted it with white buttercream first and chilled it to firm it up for about 10 or 15 minutes in the freezer. I went back and applied blue frosting around the base. And now I'm just going to use a bench scraper to smooth out that bottom blue frosting. I didn't want it to be too thick because we're going to be piping the legs on top. And here's my flamingo. It's been probably about an hour or so since I created the flamingos, and they've firmed up enough that I can easily pick them up. And I'm sure a lot of that is thanks to the Tylose powder that I had kneaded into the frosting. It's totally fine though if you want to apply the flamingos while the fondant is still soft. I just think it's a little bit easier if it's had a chance to set up. And I'm just gluing it to the cake with a little buttercream. Again, I feel like it's easiest to apply the flamingos to a chilled cake. That way, if you need to rearrange the placement at all, you're not going to mess up your frosting. And so if you are able to, just pop it in the freezer for about 10 or 15 minutes to firm up the buttercream before applying the flamingos. So here I'm using a small round piping tip to apply our buttercream legs. And the best way to pipe a straight line is to touch down with the piping tip as you're applying pressure, and then just very slightly lift up the piping bag as you're still moving. And then when you're ready to end it, just release the pressure. And that way you're not going to have the shaky lines that you would if you had the piping tip right up against the cake the whole time. So just lightly touch down and lift up, and then back down again and release the pressure. And of course, if you would rather create fondant legs, that would be really easy and just as cute. So that's also an option. Okay, so I'm using a tip 352 for the feathers, and this is just a leaf tip. And you can see the triangular opening is on top. I kind of turn the piping tip so that that opening is on top and bottom rather than side to side. And I'm just creating the feathers. And I really like the dimension that this gives. If you'd rather do just a fondant body, that is totally fine. But I just think the buttercream is kind of a fun look. So I'm doing the same thing on the other side. And just creating just small little feathers. So I'm just barely squeezing my piping bag. And that's it. So as a final touch, or one of the last details, I'm adding hearts all over the cake. So I used Wilton Rose for this coloring gel. And that's what I used for the flamingos also, but this is just a little bit more color, so it's more of a hot pink. And I'm just using a small round piping tip to create hearts all over. So basically you're just going to pipe a little dot of buttercream and kind of pull it down, and do the same thing on the other side to create the hearts. And I also am going to add just a little bit of piping around the flamingos' feet so that it looks like their feet are going into the water. And that's also with a small round piping tip. And piping tip 3 would work well for this, or 4. And with that same piping tip, I'm just going to create a quick little bead border around the base of the cake. And so when I do that, I just bring my piping tip slightly up as I apply pressure, and then back down again as I release pressure for each little bead of piping. Okay, so our cake is finished. I think it turned out really cute, and as you saw, this is not a difficult cake to create, and it would be perfect for Valentine's Day or anniversaries, so I hope you'll give it a try. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.